Hello, children of class 8. Hope all of you are doing well and staying indoors and staying safe. So, today is the last part of the video and the lesson, The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, from the New Gems textbook of 8th class. So, as all of you are aware that this is an adventure story, it is a mystery written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And so far as we know, we have proceeded the story where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson have given the advertisement in the newspaper, and Mr. Henry Baker is coming to meet Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson at 221B, which is on Baker Street and which is actually the home of Sherlock Holmes. Now, the man with the hat is Henry Baker. So let us see what happens next. I am reading the text now. It became quite clear to us that he was innocent. So Holmes gave him a fine goose to replace the one he lost and sent him off very happy and contented. The next step was to trace the seller of the goose. Some questioning of Mr. Baker led us to the seller, Mr. Breckenridge. A little conversation with him, and we found Mr. Baker's goose for Christmas had come from a lady called Mrs. Oakshott from Brixton Road. Mrs. Oakshott from Brixton Road. As Holmes and I were making plans to contact Mrs. Oakshott, we heard a hubbub near Mr. Breckenridge. The goose seller was shaking his fists at a little rat-faced man who was whining that the goose was his. "Ha! This may save us a visit to Brixton Road," whispered Holmes, and went after the man. The man, it turned out, was Ryder, the hotel attendant. See, now everything falls into place. And see, where did we stop? Now, Holmes had put the advertisement in the paper that whoever is the owner of the hat can come and collect, and the goose also. So Mr. Henry had come, and because he was innocent, he was not charged of anything, and he was not the doer of the crime. So he was innocent, and with a lot of questioning, and they came to know it was quite clear to them that he was innocent. And so Holmes gave him a fine goose to replace the one he had lost and sent him off very happy and contented. So now that's the end of Mr. Henry Baker, the man with the tall man who had lost his hat and who had lost his goose. So now what happens is, the next step was to trace the seller of the goose. Now, from whom did they purchase the actual goose? Who is the seller? So they narrowed it down to one Mr. Breckenridge. A little conversation with him, and they found Mr. Baker's goose for Christmas had come from a lady called Mrs. Oakshott from Brixton Road. Yes, so she was Mrs. Oakshott from Brixton Road. So perhaps Mrs. Oakshott and Mr. Breckenridge were living on the same, the street or the road or the same area and the same place, because as they were talking to as Holmes and see, I'm reading the text here. As Holmes and I were making plans to contact Mrs. Oakshott, we heard a hubbub near Mr. Breckenridge. The goose seller was shaking his fists at a little rat-faced man who was whining that the goose was his. See, the goose seller was Mr. Breckenridge, but Mr. Breckenridge had in turn got the goose from Mrs. Oakshott. Now, who is Mrs. Oakshott? We will read the text. The man, it turned out, was Ryder, the hotel attendant. He was Mrs. Oakshott's brother. She bred geese for the table for her living and had promised Ryder a fine goose for Christmas. Ryder, who had given evidence against the plumber, was the one who had stolen the gem. He went to see his sister with the gem in his pocket. He put it into the mouth of the goose he thought his sister had reserved for him to avoid being caught red-handed. Okay, I will read the text again for you. The man, it turned out, was Ryder, the hotel attendant. He was Mrs. Oakshot's brother. She bred geese for the table for her living and had promised Ryder a fine goose for Christmas. Ryder, who had given evidence against the plumber, was the one who had stolen the gem. He went to see his sister with the gem in his pocket. He put it into the mouth of the goose he thought that his sister had reserved for him, to avoid being caught red-handed. However, he got the wrong goose, and the goose that had the gem got sold to Mr. Baker through Mr. Breckenridge. So, the words in blue, she bred geese for the table. Breeding geese for the table means rearing geese for meat. That was her livelihood. She used to depend on it. So Mrs. Oakshott was in turn Ryder's brother. Now Ryder is the same guy who is the hotel attendant. He's the same man who is the hotel attendant and who had given the false witness against the plumber. He had given evidence against the plumber that he had stolen the gem. So he thought that his sister would have kept aside the gem which he had the goose which he had cleverly put the gem into. Ryder, he had put the gem, the blue diamond, the carbuncle, in the goose's mouth, which his sister thought had reserved for him. But little did he know that the goose got sold to Mr. Baker through Breckenridge. Okay, so how did they come to know? As Holmes and Watson were making plans to contact Mrs. Oakshott, they heard a hubbub near Mr. Breckenridge. So the goose seller was shaking his fist. So Ryder had come directly to meet Mr. Breckenridge because he wanted to have a face-to-face contact and ask what he actually did to that particular goose. So probably he would have spoken to his sister, Mrs. Oakshott, and found out that she had sent a particular goose to. She would have sent a particular a number of geese to these people. That is the people at Mr. Breckenridge's shop, right? So Mr. Breckenridge had got the goose, and that particular goose which Ryder was looking for was sold to Mr. Henry Baker. So now goes on. However, he got the wrong goose, and the goose that had the gem got sold to Mr. Baker to Mr. Breckenridge. In despair, Ryder tried to recover the goose from Mr. Baker by having him waylaid by hoodlums. But as it happened, neither did Ryder get the goose nor did he recover the gem, because Mr. Peterson came by and frightened the roughs away and brought the goose to Holmes. Yes, this story was adapted and rewritten by Miss Uma Raman. So there is the fine, subtle irony which Conan Doyle uses. See, there are a number of instances where he uses irony, but the irony in this fact and the humor is, though Ryder had very cunningly put the gem in the mouth of the goose, but he forgot to have that particular and the most important conversation of a thief and his accomplice, that okay, we will put a mark or we will set aside or this particular goose, how to identify, to make an identification. They did not have that conversation, and unfortunately because of this brother and the sister's no coordination of sort, Ryder actually lost the blue carbuncle, which was in the first place, which belonged to the Countess of Morcar. Why was the goose not the one which Ryder was looking for is, even though he had come to the conclusion, but before anything could happen, on the Christmas day, on the Christmas morning, when Mr. Henry Baker had actually come to buy a goose from Mr. Breckenridge, he was the lucky one. He got the goose Yes, he got the goose in his hand without knowing that there was a gem in the goose's mouth, and which would have which he could have taken it in the first place. But as of then, when he was going back to his home, um, now it is no doubt that Mr. Ryder, the thief, he only would have arranged those hoodlums um, to confront Mr. Baker, and he only had sent those hoodlums. Yes, but as it happened that neither did Ryder get the goose nor did he recover the gem, because Mr. Peterson came by and frightened the roughs away. When because when they frighten away? Mr. Peterson had come by and frightened away the roughs on Christmas morning when Henry Baker was taking the goose to his home. So this is a very fine story, and this is a very comical, kind of a subtle a comical thing, but it basically is an adventure story, and I hope all of you have enjoyed the story till now. And this is the last part of the video. Please pause wherever needed and you can go into detail. If you remember, the first page of the lesson, we had introduced the author, we had introduced the lesson, and if you want for any reference, please go and check the part 1 of the video. And the next page, it was explained how Peterson had come and given it to Sherlock Holmes, the hat and including the goose, and how Holmes had come to a conclusion that the hat belonged to a tall man, and how he wanted to give it to some Mr. Baker, and all those conclusions which was written in the text, which is written in the text, you can go through. And this is the third page. This is the final page. This is the third page where you actually come to know what is the story and where it is leading to, the theft. The plumber is introduced, the countess was introduced, and also the main thief was introduced. And this is the final page where you can actually see the picture of Mrs. Oakshott, the sister of Ryder, the thief, the hotel attendant, standing there. Yes, this is a wonderful story of adventure. I am sure all of you have enjoyed as much as I did. So please go through the video once again if there are any questions, and the home assignment will be sent to you tomorrow. Till then, children, take care and God bless you all.